Okay, we've got about 24 folks joining us so far, and I'll continue to admit them as people join in. But we do like to start these right on time to preserve everyone's time. So welcome everyone to today's RedShelf Connections event. Today is an info sandwich, which happens at noon when we on the dates that we schedule those. Today's topic is evaluating a vendor's VPAT, where we will be discussing the importance of a third-party VPAT in higher education, tips for evaluating the validity of a vendor's VPAT, and how that reflects their commitment to accessibility. Our guests and hosts today are Amy Salmon, Senior Accessibility Consultant at Level Access, and RedShelf's own Erin Lucas, Senior Director of Digital Accessibility. My name is Steve Mendez. I am the Marketing Manager at RedShelf, so you've seen my name in your email here or there. And you may again, as we follow up with you, with a link to the recording of this session after we close today. Before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of things for your benefit. As I said, we are recording this, and we encourage you to turn on your camera. Part of the reason we started doing RedShelf Connections was to help our industry connect with each other visually as well as audibly, so that we can just add that bit of networking to the experience, especially in this time when we don't see as much of each other as we used to. So feel free to leave your camera on. As far as your microphones go, we do kind of clear the decks for the host to speak for the bulk of the time. So while they're speaking, if you have a question, feel free to put that into the chat feature and leave your microphone off. With that said, we do have one break built into the time today so that we can invite questions verbally, and at that time, feel free to turn your microphone off. I'm sorry, to turn your microphone on, unmute your microphone, and feel free to deliver that question orally if you'd like. But the chat feature will be on the entire time for you to put questions in if you like. If you put a question into chat, we will do our best to get to it either during that break if it's pertinent to the topic that we're on at the moment, or at the end we also reserve time for Q&A from the audience, and we will collect chat questions and address them at that time as well. We've scheduled 30 minutes in your schedule for this session today. If we have so many questions that we have to go over that 30 minutes, feel free to drop. No shame in dropping a little bit early if you have to, or before we're done with Q&A. And we'll include answers to those questions in the recording that we'll provide a link to you to via email within the next day or so. And as I mentioned, you'll get that recording via email. You'll also get links to any resources that we've mentioned in today's presentation. So you'll see some links to things that Level Access might be providing. Don't worry if you can't click that in the video. We will send the follow-up email to all registrants, whether or not you were able to attend today, with links to those resources. So with all that said, all that housekeeping, thanks for bearing with me there. I'm going to turn it over to Erin and Amy, starting with Erin. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Steve. Thanks everybody for joining us today to talk about VPATs and how important they are and how you can evaluate them. And I want to give a special shout out to Amy for agreeing to join us today. We're currently working with Level Access to do a VPAT audit on our e-reader. We're getting ready to wrap that up here in the next couple of weeks. And Amy and I have known each other for a while, and I'm so happy that we're working with their team. And she's going to highlight some of the things also that they are doing to kind of help you understand the path of going down a VPAT audit. We're really lucky to have Amy here talking with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Erin. It's my pleasure to be here.
So why don't we go ahead as soon as my clicker decides to work. Here we go. So let's start with just kind of basically saying, what is a VPAT? And what is the third-party VPAT? I know a lot of people know maybe tangentially what a VPAT is, and maybe they think they might need one, or they might be evaluating one at some point. But why don't we just go ahead and define it? So the VPAT is short for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. It was developed jointly by the General Services Administration, also known as GSA, and the Information Technology Council. And they do maintain the document. They refresh it regularly, especially when there's new rules around WCAG that come out. And then they update the template itself, and then that is what's used to actually create a VPAT by a company like Level Access for vendors like RedShelf. And essentially it documents the accessibility conformance of a digital product according to Section 508 and WCAG requirements. And it is a self-disclosing document, and it's designed to detail all of the aspects and requirements of how the product supports each criteria. And that's important to note there, how the product supports the criteria. Amy, anything you wanted to add here?
Just that I wanted to add is that a VPAT is for any digital asset. That could be website, web interface, web app, mobile apps. It could also be software and hardware. So anything that is information communication technology should have a VPAT, especially for the individuals that in procurement for higher education. So keep that in mind, that a VPAT is not just for RedShelf or for the RedShelf e-reader. You should be looking for VPATs for anything that is supporting that information communication technology on your campus or in your organization.
Great, so let's kind of jump into the meat of it. So let's talk a little bit about why it's important to have a third-party VPAT, how that affects how valid your VPAT is, and then take a little bit of a look inside the VPAT and kind of look for some good things and maybe some not so good things about what you might see in a vendor's VPAT. So first of all, why third party? So this is not our first time working with a consulting firm to do a third party VPAT. It's required by higher education institutions, like Amy had mentioned, and it's really just an unbiased validation. It's not RedShelf saying, yes, we meet all these criteria, look at how fantastic we are. We know that it's important to make sure that someone else, a vendor who has users of assistive technology that can validate our product on behalf of RedShelf is so crucial when it comes to VPAT. So when you're looking at someone's VPAT and it's a vendor, say like RedShelf, third party is one of the key things that you should be looking for. Amy, anything to add there?
Well, and just to clarify, by third party, that doesn't mean hiring Joe from down the street who happens to design websites. When you're looking at who did the VPAT, look at their credentials. Do they actually have knowledge, experience, and expertise in the ability to evaluate that digital asset for conformance to the VPAT and the standards? And push back a little bit on the vendor and ask them to provide the credentials on who did that VPAT so that you can get that information up front.
Yeah, that's great advice for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of taking a quick peek inside of a VPAT, what a VPAT looks like when you look at the template itself. There are specific ratings and consistent remarks that you should see here. Amy, you probably know better than us the best way to describe these types of things in the VPAT.
Right, so a VPAT is structured. First of all, know that if they're calling it a VPAT, it should have the registered symbol because that is actually a registered terminology by the Access Board and the ITC, Information Technology Council. So you want to make sure that it is a valid VPAT and that they are using the actual VPAT template for that. And so on this slide, we're showing an image of the VPAT. There's sections of the VPAT. The first that's the most important, I think, is the very top of the VPAT, which talks about what is the product being evaluated, when was the evaluation conducted, or when is this VPAT being published, and then most importantly, how was the evaluation conducted to provide the results for the VPAT. And if you just see A, that it's empty, I'd be a little worried. B, what you should be looking for is how did they evaluate, say, RedShelf to provide the results for this VPAT? What browsers did they use? What assistive technology was used? What testing tools were used? Did they use an automated accessibility tool? Did they do manual testing? Did they do functional testing with users with disabilities using assistive technology? That should all be spelled out. And then once you get into the actual results, which is the accessibility conformance report of the VPAT, you have 3 columns. The far left column is what is the success criteria or the standard that is being measured. The middle column is the ratings or ranking of that, and that's measured in very specific ways. Supports with exceptions, does not support, oh, I'm sorry, they changed it. Supports, partially supports, does not support, not applicable, and not present. You can only have a not present support for WCAG AAA. So if you see anybody putting a rating that says not present and they're not doing AAA, or they haven't excluded AAA, then that should be a concern too. Then the far right is the remarks. How did they support, or where are they partially supporting this standard or success criteria? If it's a does not support, what happened and what are their plans to support it? So those are kind of a high level summary of what a VPAT should look like. There should be tables. If it's strictly a web interface like the RedShelf's e-reader, you really should be seeing tables for the WCAG 2.0A and then WCAG 2.0 AA. And you should see a table for documentation. So those are the three primary tables you should be seeing in a web e-reader VPAT. There are other tables that would be populated if that VPAT was for, say, software or content creation software, for example. So, but for the majority of what I think you're looking at for ebooks, e-publishers, e-publishing, e-readers, you're going to want to make sure it's got the WCAG 2.0 A table and 2.0 AA table in there. And, look at those remarks and make sure that they're all filled out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The other thing, I did want to put here, I just checked my notes. Make sure you check the version of the VPAT. So as we said, this is a registered document that's put out by the Information Technology Council. And the current version is VPAT 2.4. There are 4 different flavors of the VPAT now. You've got the VPAT 2.4 508, the VPAT 2.4 WCAG, the VPAT 2.4 International, and the VPAT 2.4 EU or European Union. The ones you're going to encounter the most in higher education and the education is you're going to be looking for the VPAT 508 version. And don't accept any VPATs that are not at least a 2.0 or higher. If they are doing a VPAT 1.0, that VPAT template is no longer even supported. So
and they would miss a lot of criteria there too. For sure, they'd be missing some criteria if they were only
right. With the VPAT 2.0, it maps to the new section 508 revised, which mapped to the WCAG 2.0 A and AA standards. So you don't even look at a VPAT that doesn't at least have a 2 point something in its title. Okay. Anything else there, Erin?
I don't know if you want to go into a little bit more detail about what good remarks look like.
Sure. Is that on the next slide?
Yeah, the next slide. I think it's just a little bit more detail for the slide before that.
So what does a good remark look like? So first of all, you want to make sure that they're accurately reporting supports versus does not support versus partially supports in the ratings. And then here's an example. So 1.3.1, that's one of the WCAG standards. It's a level A standard. So content such as headings, lists, and data tables are marked up with marked up appropriately. That's an example of a proper identification of a rating with a good comment. We've got one here. Here's the same 1.3.1 partially supports. And most pages with contents with headings are marked up appropriately, but there are some that are missing. So they identify. So they've got exceptions on where they're not doing the headings correctly. So that's an example of a partially support. They admit, they take credit when they did it right. They admit where they may not have implemented that particular success criteria thoroughly throughout the website or web interface. So here's 1.3.1 does not support. Most pages with content uses headings do not use the heading structure correctly. So they're admitting they didn't do this right. So these are all examples of good comments that you should be looking for. So when you're reviewing that VPAT, first of all, make sure that those ratings are correct. Again, there's only supports, partially supports, does not support, not applicable, or not present. There's 5 ratings they can use. If you're seeing things like supports with minimal exceptions, that's not a valid rating for a VPAT. They shouldn't be using that. Or the old supports with exceptions, which is no longer one of the ratings that are used in the VPAT 2.3 or 2.4 versions. So if it's a VPAT 2.3 version, it shouldn't say supports with exceptions. It should say partially supports. That's a flag to you right there. If you're seeing wrong ratings being used or they're customizing the ratings, then you might want to take a little bit deeper dive into the actual validity of that VPAT.
And Amy, wouldn't you say that it's better to have more descriptive things within the VPAT ratings than no description at all?
Oh, in the remarks?
Yeah, the remarks.
Yes. So in the ratings, you've got the supports, partially supports.
Yeah.
You're going to pick one there. In the remarks, so if it says supports and there's absolutely no remarks, you're not giving the person who's reviewing the VPAT any information about what you did do to implement that success criteria or standard. So you should be, every single cell in these tables should have something in them. So if it supports, they should be telling you how they're supporting that success criteria. As we show in these examples here. If it's partially supports, they should be stating where they are supporting it, but also where they're not supporting it. And so yes, the more detail in the remarks, the better, because that's going to tell you when you're evaluating whether you want to purchase this the digital asset or use this digital product, you need to know up front what your challenges are going to be and what your users with disabilities might encounter in using that website or that web app or that software. So make sure those remarks are thorough and detailed.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then, just a few other things to look for around, things that are supported that aren't supported. Amy, I don't know if you want to go through those or if you want me to.
No, I can. So support levels that don't match, and we just talked about that. So again, the 5 levels are identified. They're very clearly defined by the Access Board and the Information Technology Council. So if you see weird support ratings in there, like supports on 50%, that would be an example of a bad example of what would be a concern. So statements that are associated with wrong criteria, and believe me, the examples I'm showing you, I actually have seen on VPATs. So captions are provided for audio description so people who are blind know what is being said. That's a direct quote from a VPAT that I have reviewed. Lack of understanding about how that criteria should be implemented. So an example there might be, do I have an example on this one or on the next slide? An example of that would be, so first, let's again use the audio visual example. So if it's a video that has audio, the remarks would be, blind users aren't going to access this video, so we didn't bother to caption it, nor did we provide text transcripts. So, and again, I've seen actual remarks like that. The other red flag would be a VPAT that has every single rating as supports. That is it's a direct red flag to me as a third-party accessibility consultant, because I'm going to look at it and say, they're not being honest with us. Because it's very difficult to have a 100% clean VPAT with every single success criteria support.
We call that the unicorn of VPATs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So,
here's your made up exemptions. Next slide. You're
okay, thank you. So here's some examples of, and these again are taken verbatim out of VPATs that we've reviewed and looked at. So I'm just getting to that one. So I've got the one. So this is when they claim exceptions, and I love this, and I'll see this, supports, and then they'll put in the remarks, exception, and here's the one I was telling, blind people won't use this product, so it doesn't need to conform to the standard. That's a pretty broad-based exception, and if you're saying that, you better be able to back that up, because personally, they can't. Okay, that's completely.
Yeah.
This product will only be used by the military, and no one in the military has a disability. That's why we're going to have an exception. We don't have to support these standards or success criteria. Those are some exceptions. Now, and this is another one, a letter stating they don't need to provide a VPAT. Or that they are working on conforming but don't have a VPAT or ACR. I see that a lot.
Mhm.
Or claims that it's going to cost us too much money to do a VPAT. So, you know, can we just waive that requirement? I can tell you with a lot of the higher ed groups that I have worked with over the last 10, 15 years, the procurement process in most higher ed require VPATs for any information communication technology. And if a vendor is saying, I won't provide a VPAT or I can't provide a VPAT, that should be a red flag to you right away, that accessibility is not a priority for that vendor.
Yeah. So,
and that they're not putting the right priority on it.
One of the things that we heard recently was, oh yeah, we have that. We're going to take care of that in the next couple of weeks. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's another concern. If somebody says, oh, I don't have a VPAT, but I'll get you one by the end of the week.
Right, exactly.
It takes about an average of 4 to 6 weeks, depending on who you're working with for your third party, for them to test the interface, you know, basically provide all of the results and then write the VPAT. It's not something that can be done in a week.
Yeah. For sure, we can definitely attest to that, being in the thick of it right now. Just a couple of other ways to kind of make the connections here. Let's talk through some of the things you should be looking for in a vendor, other than just the fact that they have a third-party VPAT or have a VPAT. And then other things, recommendations for the audience in terms of communicating to vendors what their commitment to accessibility is and what they expect from, say, like a vendor like RedShelf. We can start with a couple of things here. So does the vendor have an accessibility roadmap? So those items that Amy mentioned on the VPAT, if there are things that need remediating, or the vendor is planning to make a significant change to improve accessibility, can they demonstrate that by showing you these are things that are in the planning stages? So for example, the last time that we did a VPAT, we knew that we had a little bit more work to do, and so we were very transparent about these are the JIRA tickets that we have created around this, and this is the general time frame in which this is going to be done, and these are on our roadmap. So that's something you definitely should be asking for if there's some improvements to be made. And then also, do they have a team that's dedicated to making sure accessibility is built into their products from the beginning? Are they, just basically, relying on a few people who don't really know anything about accessibility, or they don't have a demonstrated commitment to accessibility? I think that's important. And then is there somebody who's leading the program? So if you have questions, you're not just talking to someone who happened to call you up from a company and they can't answer any of your questions, or can't point you to someone who can answer your questions. Amy, any thoughts there about these items?
No, I agree with you. I think that, the vendor, whoever you're partnering with, whether it's through a RedShelf, for example, as your e-reader for your campus or your institution, you want to basically push back on them and ask them to prove A, that they have a VPAT, B, that they have a roadmap for fixing any known issues, C, what's the equivalent workaround if it's a critical issue. So if there's a critical flow in the user experience that is going to be inaccessible for, say, a user who is a keyboard-only user, what alternative workaround is available? Because that's going to affect a large chunk of your population. So making sure that they provide some kind of equivalent, which is also going to provide you with some knowledge on how much do they really know about accessibility.
Yeah.
And it does, and some of the smaller vendors, be honest, they may not have an accessibility team, but they might be partnering with a third-party accessibility firm that's supporting them in that way. So, look at how are they getting that accessibility in their process? When are they identifying it? And also how frequently are they updating their VPAT and their roadmaps? So if they provided a VPAT in the, beginning of the academic year for 2019, they really should have a new one out by the beginning of the academic year for 2020. Because as we all know, there's absolutely no way that technology or website or web app or web interface has not changed somewhat in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, very good point. Yeah. And then, you know, just ways of being able to communicate, like we mentioned, your expectations around accessibility, communicate being the absolute key word here. You know, if you have a set of standards that you expect your vendors to meet, you know, be clear about that. You know, having that desire to make a product accessible to all different groups, so whether that's on a campus or, you know, if you're just looking to evaluate some other kind of product for your company, that's pretty global, not just applicable to campus users. And then make sure that you know the vendor knows what your process is for evaluating conformance. You know, what are the expectations in terms of, you know, demos, access to your technology to validate your VPAT. And then, you know, that lets people know, the vendors that you're looking at know that you're serious about accessibility. You're not just going to basically take their word for it. And then, you know, there are contractual obligations with regards to accessibility. You know, we have that for a lot of our partners, and that is expected in higher ed, especially for that to exist for vendors like ourselves. So just everyone communicating and being clear upfront what the expectations are is a really big key to success with a VPAT in any vendor.
And the other thing I want to add to that is, you know, check your procurement process for information communication technology. Most campuses, most higher ed institutions, organizations have a procurement process that includes that accessibility language in their contracts. So requiring that they meet Section 508, WCAG 2.0, A and AA is usually right in the contractual language when they work on developing those RFQs and RFPs with vendors of digital content. That should be the first step in the process. Then there should be a direct process for ensuring that accessibility through obtaining and reviewing the VPAT for the digital product. And then, as Erin said, push back on those vendors, ask them to not only provide you with a roadmap and equivalent facilitation, but ask them to demonstrate the accessibility that they say is supported within their web interface digital asset. Ask for a demonstration of it and ask them to basically prove that they can do what they say they can do through using different assistive technology or users with disabilities. And then ask them to, you know, keep you updated. So if they push a new build out and it's affecting some of the status of the VPAT and they don't have the time to turn around a VPAT, then they should at least be notifying and updating you on if that's going to impact your users.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, that whole transparency on the part of the you know, vendor is very important too. The communication really does have to go both ways. So let's kind of wrap this up. You know, we're getting towards 12:30 here. So let's just kind of give us a few helpful resources and key takeaways from today's discussion. So Amy was nice enough to provide some helpful links within the document. Like Steve mentioned, he's going to send those out to everyone, so you'll have access to them. But essentially, it's just information about navigating a VPAT and, you know, what it should really look like. Some blog articles around VPATs. And then if you're not familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's a link here for that, as well as the different VPAT templates, the most current versions of those VPAT templates, the accessibility policy for the IT Industry Council, and then the US Access Board Guidelines and Standards, Section 508 refresh. All very important resources, will all be super helpful for anyone kind of navigating the waters of a VPAT. And then, you know, for us, we always try to make sure that, you know, you've got the right stakeholders involved when you're evaluating a vendor's VPAT on campus. We always encourage anyone looking to, you know, bring on RedShelf or bring on any other kind of vendor like ours to include the disability services offices in your decision making. They are key to knowing what their students need, and you know, it's easy to make assumptions. So it's really great to include the DSOs in that decision making. And then don't be afraid, you know, to ask questions about the product, how it was evaluated. If you see anything that's confusing or appears to be a red flag, you know, always bring that up to the vendor. We're always happy to answer any questions that anyone ever has about our VPAT. And then, you know, just reiterating, making sure that that vendor has a commitment beyond the VPAT, because there's so many times when people view the VPAT as a one and done and like, we never have to do this again. We've done it. We finished the VPAT. So just always make sure that they have that continuing commitment. Any other takeaways to add for you, Amy?
No, I think you covered everything. And if anyone has questions, I think we've got a few minutes. We can let anyone ask questions if they want to.
Sure. Steve, you got any questions for us?
I haven't had any come through chat, so if anyone wants to use that channel for a question, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, you can unmute your microphone if you'd like and just throw one out there.
Okay.
Doesn't sound like we have anyone right now. If you do,
Not.
oh, I'm sorry. What? Regina Miller asked if we will receive a copy of the recording. Yes, you absolutely will. We'll get an email within the next day or so. Gives us enough time to download the recording and put a little intro on it and get it out to you via email. You'll also receive within that email all those links to the resources you just saw. We do have a question from Rachel on, do you recommend any how-to read of VPAT resources? So are there any resources there?
I think some of those within the links,
Okay.
right, Amy?
Yes, so Level Access does have, in some of the links there, we've got some blog posts we've got a whole section on VPAT on the Level Access blog. So one of them is how do you review a VPAT? And it goes into a little bit more depth than we were able to go into in today's Lunch and Learn session. But that is a great tool that you can use that'll walk you through what you need to be looking for, what are the different sections of the VPAT, and how those should be filled out.
Great. We've actually had 2 other questions come through chat, which we will cover, but I want to mention to everyone who's still there, if you have to drop right now, we're going to record answers to these questions and you'll be able to see it at the end. From William, have you ever heard of a case where a buyer does the testing of the VPAT and submit the results to the vendor?
Oh.
Well, I've actually been in a situation with a higher education institution where they contracted a third-party consulting firm, Level Access, to evaluate the accessibility of 4 different LMSs. And doing that, each of the 4 LMSs were marked up against a VPAT. That kind of VPAT was provided back to the higher education institution, who then went back to the individual vendors with those results. So yes, I have seen it. It's kind of a pricey lift for a lot of higher ed to do that, but if they're really wanting to make sure that they're getting a valid results, and they may not have confidence that the vendor's providing those valid results, they want to manage it on their own, and they can do that.
Yeah.
Great.
Interesting.
Another question from Cassandra. Other than checking the ITI website, is there a way to know when new VPAT templates are released?
I mean, that's probably the best way. Or if you're on an like accessibility in the news newsletter, you might get it in your email.
Right. It's hit or miss when they're going to release it, but usually they post on the Access Board site when they've got a new version coming out, or that a new version is in the works and the expected release of that. But you can actually sign up through Access Board as part of their email list and get notifications from them in your email. So be prepared to get a lot of information from Access Board on different topics, but in that would also be an update when they're going to release a new version of the VPAT.
And you could certainly expect a new version if, WCAG goes up a level, right? WCAG 2.2, certainly there'll be an update there.
Right. So WCAG, the VPAT 2.4 is with the European Union and international version. Is the reason they went to the 2.4 is that the European Union standards and the international version are now mapping to WCAG 2.1 A and AA, whereas the VPAT 2.3 and VPAT 2.4508 are still mapping to WCAG 2.0 A and AA. So that's the difference. Be prepared though, because we're seeing right now that they're finalizing WCAG 2.2. And as soon as those new 2.2 come out, well, as soon as the government moves, which is you'll see them probably moving. I would anticipate that by probably early next year, early 2021, to March of 2021, we're going to see the Access Board and 508 looking to try to adopt 2.1, WCAG 2.1 into their policies and procedures and requirements. So if you're currently mapping to 2.1, good for you. If you aren't, be prepared to start, because 2.2 is supposed to be out by December of this year.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, for example, in preparation for our, VPAT audit, we still made sure that we were covering the 2.1 requirements. So that's important to get ahead of that stuff.
Thanks. Amy, are the costs of a VPAT standard enough to where you can mention what an average cost is?
I don't actually know. I just do them. So
having evaluated vendors for a VPAT recently, I can tell you that you do end up with quite a few numbers that are right in the middle, but definitely get lowballed, and you'll definitely get highballed. So I recommend reviewing at least 4 different third-party vendors, and then just go with the one that's the most detailed, that pays the most attention to detail, which is one of the big reasons why we chose Level Access.
It can be a situation where you get what you pay for, and
yes, and knowing we've done this more than once, and so I can say, yeah, it's definitely you get what you pay for kind of, and you could overpay for what you get too. So just
Right. Keep in mind when you're looking at pricing that out, if you're looking at other partners like Level Access, ask them to show you some examples of VPATs they've done in your area. So for example, higher ed, they're publicly available. They can ask their clients if they're okay sharing the VPATs with you, so that you can see an example of how they've done VPATs. But more importantly, it's not just creating the physical VPAT. Are they supporting the vendor longer term?
Yes.
Are they helping them fix the issues? Are they revalidating and then updating that VPAT? Are they providing the equivalent? So if we can't make it work today, what are we doing to ensure our students can still access it?
Yeah.
So exactly. Those are the things. Don't look for just a one-off that, I can write a VPAT for you for, $1,000. I'll do all the testing and write you a VPAT. I don't even know if that's realistic, but I didn't think so. Because the truth is, you will get what you paid for, and there's not going to be any follow-up with it. You want that follow-through. We're working with RedShelf right now. We've identified some of the partially supports. We've identified those before we even created the VPAT, so that they have a chance to go in and remediate, and then we come back and we revalidate it before we publish that VPAT.
Exactly. Yeah, and having that longer term relationship like RedShelf has with Level Access too, allows us to, if we decide all of a sudden we need some fancy schmancy new thing in the e-reader, and we need to have, users that use assistive technologies every single day validate that that's a good thing to do, even from the point of designs, like when we're putting designs together. That's, if you have that longer term relationship, you have someone to bounce those ideas off of. And make sure that you're keeping accessibility in mind at the beginning.
Makes it a lot easier and less repair in the end.
For sure. It's a whole lot less expensive to do it from the beginning than it is to remediate it afterwards.
Thanks. Thank you both. I'm going to give you a challenge to answer this final question in 60 seconds or less. And then if you have any other questions, audience, I see there's still quite a few people on. Feel free to reach out to any of the email addresses you see on your screen right now, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But here you go, 60 seconds to Erin and Amy. How do you get the breadth of testing across mobile, browsers, and OS to see good representation in the VPAT results reported? Can you require that from vendors?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's essentially speaks to what we're doing. Like Amy said at the beginning, we're covering multiple different assistive technologies on multiple different kinds of browsers, multiple use cases. So yeah, like we mentioned, push back to say, these are the things we require of you. Are you a campus that's using Dragon Naturally Speaking, for example? Make sure that the vendor you're selecting is tested for that. You're well within your rights to make sure that whatever vendor you're using is being tested against what you're using on your campus.
And I know we went over our 60 seconds, but I'll just say, have I
did, yeah.
done VPATs that have been that comprehensive? Yes. I've done VPATs where we've had, with browsers for Windows, Chrome, Firefox, Mac, Safari, mobile Safari, iOS, and mobile Android Chrome. But keep in mind that you can't be asking the VPAT to represent two different products.
Correct.
All right. So if it's, for example, a web e-reader like RedShelf, asking it to be shown on mobile is not asking too much, because they're basically accessing the same content in a mobile browser. But asking to evaluate, the mobile app version of it versus the browser-based version, that's two separate products with two different user interfaces. You want two different VPATs for that.
Yep. And two different sets of standards, really, in some cases.
Right.
Okay, thank you both for getting through that quickly. We're going to have to call it. We are just over 10 minutes over. So thank you again to Erin and Amy for hosting today. We hope that everyone here got something out of this. You'll get an email again with the recording, links to the resources, and also a link to an evaluation of this session. And please answer that, because that helps us focus topics in the future. I think you also get an opportunity to suggest future topics. And if you're interested in learning what those future topics might be, please go back to redshelf.com/connections. You'll see the topics that are coming up from an accessibility standpoint, but also all the other topics that we tend to that we do in the other programs that we do for RedShelf Connections. So the recordings to the previous sessions are all available there for your enjoyment. So that is going to close us today. Thank you so much again to Erin and Amy. Have a great day to you all. We hope it goes just as well as it can for you. And thanks everyone for being here.